Today we're going to talk about windows. We're going to talk about their history, how they were put together, what's going on with them, how to think about them today, and why windows are so important as you're building this house that has a narrative and has a story. And if you really want it to have an old soul, good windows are a key part of making it right.
Build Original Series, hosted by Brent Hull. New house, old soul. Sponsored by Stellar Floors and the Unico System.
Okay guys, so windows. Really the window that we're using today, okay, let's just say clad window from one of the big production companies, is a window that's been developed in the last 30 years. Okay, so I don't know if you guys remember it, when I first started building in the late 80s and early 90s, the true divided light insulated windows were the rage, right? That we were going with insulated glass, but it was a true divided light, it was a big old thick mutton. It looked ugly, it was terrible. And so today we have the simulated divided light with the glue-on wood muttons that go over top of those windows. That's really a product of the last 30 years. And so when we think about windows, we think about the breadth of our houses. Where's windows in this conversation? What's really going on? So we're going to talk about the history of those. And once I explain some of these things, you'll begin to understand why it matters. Why is true divided light so important to the look of the house? What's going on there? So if we go back to the colonial period, really glass has driven the technology of windows as much as anything else. Glass is still the weak point in window energy efficiency today, especially with a wood window. Glass and glass size was a big deal. Originally, they would make glass from a round sheet, sometimes called crown glass, sometimes called table glass, where guys would actually have these tubes. They would blow glass in a tube, they would cut it open, and then they would spin it, and through centrifugal force, you get a big glass cylinder like this, and they would cut pieces of glass out of there. Those typically, the crown or table glass piece was only about 3 feet wide. And if you've ever seen the bullseye glass, that's where the rod was snapped off when they were making the glass. And sometimes you'll see those in colonial houses above a door because it was a cheap, kind of a throwaway piece of glass, but still allowed light to come in. So already you're seeing, these windows and doors and why glass is so important. One of the reasons why historic windows pre-1850, okay, maybe 1830, are small panes is because glass didn't get very big. They went to what's called cylinder glass. And cylinder glass was the same concept, but instead of spinning the glass and having it stretch out, they threw the glass. And so they would be up on these benches and these guys would actually swing down and it would just lengthen these tubes. They'd end up with 6 feet, 8 foot tubes that they would cut open and get glass. Now, what that means is that the defects and striations and bubbles and all those things are part of the heritage of that glass and part of the charm of that glass. A cylinder glass lasts up and through almost to 1940. In the 20s, in the 30s, the big machines came down, and instead of having a guy hand blowing and throwing the cylinder glass, they'd have a big machine that would make up and pull up these huge tubes of glass that were 30 and 40 feet tall, laid down, cut open, and you still had striation and defects. But glass was everything up until about the 40s. That's when we developed float glass. And the reason why ranch-style houses have the big, plate glass windows and stuff, because we finally had the technology there to make large pieces of glass. One of the things we also forget in this modern age is how important windows were to the comfort of a home. And that the double-hung window was a great system. You'd raise the lower sash in the front of the house and lower the upper sash in the back, and you create this convection air through the house. Natural air conditioning that we obviously don't use anymore in the 50s and 60s after air conditioning became a part of most houses. But the working and operable double hung window is a fantastic way to heat and cool a home and to create natural comfort. The reason why this is so important is I see a lot of new houses with just a big sheet of glass into the window frame. No divided light, nothing movable, nothing operable, and it's the cheapest, quickest way to get a window in a house. But what ends up happening, especially with historic preservation, preservation is that when you take the windows out of a house, you're really poking the eyes out. And all the scale and dimension and beauty of the house, windows are the most important thing on historic houses. And that still should be true of your new house with an old soul. That if you want that old soul, one way to get it is to go back with divided lights, is to go back with smaller panes, is to go back with this look that reminds us of the past. The other interesting thing that the glass does is it creates a sense of scale. It helps us read, just like these windows in this room help me read how big everything is, especially on the outside of a house. That divided light pane really adds a sense of scale and proportion that helps us see the beauty in these historic houses. So one of the things that architects really love and freak out about on these historic windows is this deep shadow line. You can see in this mutton bar that single pane glass, putty glazing, that this 1 3/4 sash, about 1 inch of it, maybe 1 1/8 inches, is this profile. And so here on this side of the window, as you look at it, you get these deep shadow lines. Now, why doesn't that work on a new window? It's because what's happened is that this piece of glass, because it grows almost 3 times, sometimes even more, this window mutton bar has to lose some of its depth. And so you end up with kind of a flat, lifeless mutton bar because it doesn't have that depth and natural architectural beauty. One of the things that we have evolved, and look, I've been doing this for 30 years, and about 5 years ago, we had an epiphany, that the new windows that are being built today are not as good as the historic windows that were built 100 years ago. And what was happening is on our build jobs, we were putting in a production window. And after 15 years on one of our jobs, the windows literally rotted out. The knob actually came out of the wood and the wood was completely rotted. How was that possible? Because we were also working on historic courthouses and schools and depots, taking historic windows out of these buildings, restoring them, putting them back in, expecting them to last another 50 to 100 years. Wait a minute, why are those windows lasting so long and these windows don't last anymore? What we think is the most important feature of a new window is quality wood, and wood that isn't going to rot and fall apart in 15 years. We believe windows should last 100 years, just like they did before, and we'll get into more of that later. So really what there is with windows is a great tradition, a great practice, and really from the 1840s, 1850s, all the way up into the 1940s, about a 100-year period of time, historic windows looked like this, right? Historic windows had pegs where the joinery, there was joinery where there was through mortise and tenon that came together. This quality construction happened for 100 plus years and really created a tradition. And if you want to create a new house with an old soul, part of that is installing some of those memory pieces that take you back to another place in time. So when we look to the past, right, when we look at these historic windows that we're restoring all the time, there's a number of features that help them to perform. And really this is that lost art of building, guys, that we've forgotten how to build. And so many new manufacturers today will make a window with a flat sill, right? It doesn't last very long. Historically, those window sills were always pitched. It reminds me that, gosh, guys, if we could just pitch a windowsill, we wouldn't have to resort to AZEK and concrete and all these other newfangled products that are out there that are not supposed to rot, not supposed to ever fail. But if we just remembered how we used to build and did it with good wood, we would have things that would last a very long time. As we look to the past, as we look to this old way of building, we feel like we're really capturing a piece of heritage, a piece of history. We're maintaining craft and really looking at how they built was smart. One of the examples is this putty glazing. Now, putty glazing is a very simple product. It's basically whiting like a chalk. It's linseed oil, and it's a very simple product. But what's happening here is that it is the piece that's holding the glass in the wood frame. Now you're like, why don't we get something new? Well, here's what happens, and this is really interesting, is that when I put a piece of wood in here, water gets in here. Water basically starts attacking the wood stop as well as the mutton bar. When this rots out, when it fails, not only is my wood stop failing, but it's also eaten into my stiles and bottom rails and the mutton bars, and it has infected everything. This putty glazing is a sacrificial product, meaning it can be sacrificed. And so when water gets behind there, ultimately in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, this piece fails. And if you've got an historic house or been one and the putty glazing is gone, that's by design, right? The putty glazing is gone. We can go back in there, re-putty these windows, and have something that lasts for a very long time. It's this ingenious thinking about how things can last for a long time, and you would think that something archaic like putty glazing would be something we could advance past. It actually has a great history and a great purpose on our new windows to help them last even longer. So there are traditions. If you're building a new house with an old soul, there are traditions that you want to practice. For instance, the English casement or the French casement. Those are two definitive architectural details that are inherent and part of those building traditions. And so if you look at the way Versailles built with its doors and its mutton profiles, and there's a certain way of doing that. If you look at the old English things with the diamond glass and the leaded glass and things like that, there are traditions that are happening. The double hung window of colonial America is a classic example of building in the past. Those are clues and pieces that we want to take and bring forward to infuse our new projects with good windows. Now, a couple ways to do this. One, historic houses almost always had more windows than new houses. Windows were everywhere. Even in a 1920s bungalow, they would sometimes have 30 windows in that house. Whereas you look at a production house today or a simple starter house today, and it's very few windows. Maybe some on the front, but they're scattered around the back side of the house. That idea of having light on two sides of a room is not even contemplated today. And so natural light was a big part of how people lived. And certainly it's energy efficient. Certainly it's a beautiful way to experience light. Not only is it the quantity of lights that you need to consider as you do this. And remember, all I'm doing is looking at the past going, how did we used to do this? How did it used to be built? And so we are taking all the details. Well, what size were the lights? How many were they? How big were they? Was it, 8x4? Is it 6x3? Is it 5x2? Right? What were the sizes? What were the details that went into? What did the shutters look like? Are there shutters? What did the brick mold look like? Looking to the past, the farther you dial down, the farther you geek out into those historical architectural stories, the better your product is going to be. And Windows is a great place to geek out and try to think about how to build with an old soul in a new house. So styles, you got double hungs and casements. You got an in-swing casement, you got an out-swing casement. There's all kinds of screens and storms that we've kind of forgotten that they used to build with wood storms and wood screens that would change out between seasons. And the depth of those things versus the flimsy aluminum pieces that you get from some companies today really is one of those layering pieces that will make your house more beautiful and will give it an old soul. So I want to go out to the shop. I want to show you how we're building our 100-year window, how we're infusing the past into it, and are thinking about getting something so it lasts 100 years. So let's go check it out. I think we're going to have fun. Okay guys, just wanted to show and share our 100-year window. This is a sample that we give the architects and people who are specifying our window because it really explains and shows the heart of it, the guts of it, and the magic of it. Like, why is this window special? I mean, the quick answer is that we've copied the past to a point that we know that those historic windows from the courthouses and the depots and the schools that we've redone, we know those windows last a long time. What's the secret sauce? And the one secret sauce is wood, and we'll talk about wood real quick. But the other one is the design details that go into this window that make it special, that make it interesting, that make it perform really well. If we take our sash out, right, the step in our sill right here, right, all of these little steps here, we discovered that when we tested our window, that one of the ways it passes the air and wind water infiltration test is these steps. Because truthfully, water in a high wind will actually run uphill. And it'll run uphill and actually come inside your window. These steps stop that, okay? The pitch here is 11 degrees, right? We know that if it goes down to 7 degrees or less, 11 to 14 is kind of the magic spot of the degree pitch in the sill so that it performs well. Notice that we have a step in the bottom of our sill, so it sits down perfectly right in there, makes a really snug fit. The weather stripping is a big deal, okay? We do not use cheap weather stripping. We use this grooved weather stripping that, again, all of the details that we're putting into this window are done because we've seen them perform so well historically. And this grooved weather stripping is kind of another piece of the secret sauce, that we have a groove here, and that when this sash sits inside here, we've got a very tight fit. When it gets tested, right, we know that it performs well because that weather stripping stops the air infiltration. The way we're making our weight pocket, right, that we've got a divider in here. Why do we have a divider in here? The divider on the best historic windows that McKean, Mead & White used to design in the turn of the century had a divider inside that divided the weight pockets, because the sash sometimes will clang, sometimes they'll hit each other, sometimes they'll get hung up on each other. And this divider bar was put in there so that the weights never hit. We don't see really details like that on windows after 1930. But if we're going to look at the best windows from the past, they always had that divider, so we've always got to put in there. We've got on the inside, we've got an adjustable stop, right? Why did we do an adjustable stop? Because weather changes. We know that it gets hot and things swell, and it gets cold and things shrink. If you've ever had a sash rattle or be too loose or be too tight, this adjustable stop here, we loosen that up with a screw, this stop will move back and forth, and I can micro adjust my windows so that they perform excellently, right? Where do we get this? Oh yeah, we looked at the past. This is kind of those best windows from the late 1800s, early 1900s had this adjustable stop. So we're kind of taking the Cadillac of the early 1900s window and building it again. The other piece of this thing is if you compare this window to a new window, all of a sudden all the parts and pieces start shrinking, and the shadow lines, the depth, the architectural beauty is gone, it's lost. Another piece of the secret sauce is finishing the design details that are different. If you look at a new window, the blind stop, which is this piece that kind of holds in the sash on the outside, is about 1/8 of an inch. It's shrunk down. This is 3/4 of an inch, right? That difference adds to the depth and is a subtle deal. Our windowsill at the bottom is 1.125 inches, right? We've gone from a 2-inch material down to this thinner piece. That too is kind of one of those beefier details. We can do our bottom sill as a 2-inch piece, just like they did back in colonial America. So we are building the window from the early 1900s, copying the past, making it awesome. One of the things that always comes up with windows, especially when we're building a new historic window, is energy efficiency, right? What do we do about energy efficiency? The truth is that if I'm going to build a window that lasts 100 years, I can't put in a product that's only going to last 15 or 20. One of those things is the insulated glass. We use single pane glass because this is a 1,000-year product, right? Glass never breaks down, right? It never fails, but insulated glass does. And sadly, the whole window industry has gotten to a point where they've built obsolescence into their product so that if this window has insulated glass and fails, they want you to replace the whole window. It's very wasteful and it's bad. So there are things to overcome with the window. For instance, my single pane glass has an R value of 1, okay? An insulated piece of glass in a production window has an R value of 2. But the problem is that if you look at the energy statistics, only about 30% of our energy loss goes out windows and doors. You're not calculating a 50% increase in energy efficiency over 100% of your house. It's a very small part of your house. So it's much more efficient to build an envelope that's really tight and then put in a window that's going to last a long time. Because the insulated glass is the Achilles heel of the modern window, right? It is the problem, it's the thing that's going to fail. And you're not getting enough energy efficiency boost by going to insulated glass because of the beauty you're losing, because of the longevity that you're losing. It just doesn't make sense. Now, in the South, where the median temperature in Fort Worth is 68 degrees or 62 degrees, somewhere in that range, single pane glass isn't a problem. In the South, we have a heat gain problem. We don't have a heat loss problem. Single pane glass in California, Florida, Arizona, Texas, all along the south, the southern border, this should be the window that everybody uses. But when you get up into New England, you get up into Minnesota, you get up into those areas where they do have a very cold climate, what we would suggest instead of doing the insulated glass is doing the Pilkington Spacia glass, which is a glass that is a vacuum insulated. Now, most insulated glass is sealed, but it's not vacuum sealed. The Pilkington is vacuum sealed, and therefore it goes from an R value, not of 1, but an R value of between 4 and 7. So now you're really speaking about an appreciable difference. The other great thing about the Pilkington is that you aren't relying on a rubber gasket on the outside of the window. Those glass pieces have been brazed together. And because they've been brazed together with glass, it's a long-lasting seal, right? It's not going to fail. So there are solutions, right? Another solution, another historic solution that they did originally was they would use storms, right? Storms in the winter and screens in the summer. And these were hang on the outside of your window. They would sit right here. And then you have a cavity gap, right? A gap in your window of almost 3 inches as opposed to 1/8 of an inch with insulated glass. So much more efficient way of sealing up your windows with those historic storms, historic screens that really share the character of the house, share the beauty of the house, and really make it special and wonderful. The last piece is the wood quality. We use sapele, we use caboni, we use akoya, we use proven, long-lasting historic woods. We know that if the wood's bad, this window won't last. So our wood is the best long-lasting wood that we can find, that we know that's available to make sure that this window lasts 100 years. Wood is the key, guys. And if you can get the wood right, you solve a lot of problems. You solve a lot of the challenges that are happening with windows that are rotting out way too soon. Windows are key, right? Windows are one of those, maybe the most important architectural feature on the home. If you can get that right, you really have done yourself well. We think the 100-year window is the solution for the new house that wants an old soul.